Welcome back, everyone. Our next speaker creates streamlined natural interfaces that span the divide between human and machine. Among her recent projects, you'll find Soto, which is a wearable corded keyboard that works with Bluetooth devices like smartphones and tablets. Her educational background includes Yale and Brown. She was published at both, and she's been extensively published in BuzzFeed, covering topics like human-machine interaction and how technology is received in our society and its role. Today, we draw on our expertise to learn about how using biomimicry can unlock the illusion of human elements within robots and machines. Please welcome to the Hackaday Super Conference stage, Christine Sunu.
Hello. This is so exciting. Hi, everybody. So I'm Christine. And I would like it if before we started this talk, everybody could get up. Please stand up. Just everybody stand up. Shake it out. You know, wave your arms around. High five your neighbor. I just want you to feel for a second what a cool and streamlined and incredibly complex machine your own body is. Just feel yourself being alive for a second, because that's really what this talk is going to be about. It is about being alive and the effect of that on how we design hardware. So I am, much like you, a generalist in this awesome, endless learning of electronics and making. So I previously ran the developer community at Particle, and then I worked on weird open source robots at BuzzFeed, and I currently do random product work, and I post tutorials in electronics and design at hackpretty.com. And most of my work focuses on emotive interactivity in physical and digital objects, which means really I work on getting people to feel living emotions about unalive objects. And that may be, oh no, it's fine, yeah. And whether that's like an app or a hardware product or a robot pet. And one of the shortcuts to getting a user to feel deep emotions, whether that's attachment, care, joy, or even sometimes fear, is to use biomimicry. And I had the other clicker that I put over down somewhere. Did you just take it? I know, I'm the worst. This is my problem with losing things. Can I cue you? Just to go forward? Next. Okay. So we do see biomimicry in tech news all the time these days, right? Like a lot of technologists will focus on biomimicry because it offers these amazing creative solutions to hard problems. But of course, there's another much simpler reason to use it, which is that biomimicry is fun and funny and crazy and super weird, and it makes us feel something, right, that other more typical robots don't necessarily do. I mean, let's face it. This is much funnier than this. And this is much cuter than this, although this is cool. And this is way more terrifying than this, just at a baseline. I mean, look, we're humans, right? We've evolved to deal with other living things. You know, so when machines decide to imitate these living things, it makes us feel these feelings that we usually reserve for our animal and insect and human friends. And that can make us react much more strongly and emotionally to a robotic stimulus. The power of these emotions that we feel when we see something we think is alive, it can be overwhelming. I was talking about emotive biomimicry a couple months ago at an event in San Francisco, and I had this little bot, and I carried it around the whole time while I discussed with people how you fake your robot being alive, right? And then at the end, this little guy, what we feel when we see him, that's some deep programming. I'm really uncomfortable watching him be in pain. And I think it's a good question to ask, whether we're ever going to be able to see something that appears alive and feel nothing, to watch it struggle and feel nothing, to watch it die and feel nothing. Living things need other living things. And we are alive, aren't we? Okay. So I'm pretty sure that they, I am pretty sure that they added the applause at the end there because I thought that I walked off the stage to shocked gasping followed by total silence. People were really affected by the worm getting killed on stage. Even though I told them it was a robot, the entire talk was about the illusion they were experiencing at that moment, and I had the words, "This is a robot," projected on the screen behind me. Like, there was a cognitive scientist who came up to me after the talk and told me that even though she knew everything I was doing, she still cried when I snapped the worm in half. Cried. Which goes to show that human emotions are very powerful. And making your users feel something can be a very, very powerful thing. I mean, feelings are important, right? Feelings guide the perception of your product. They guide clicks on buttons such as subscribe and like and add to cart. They guide user experience. And biomimicry is a really powerful shortcut to feelings. So it becomes really useful in product design or even in weekend hacking projects. I mean, if I'm building something for myself, I'm much more likely to do a task if I feel generally good when, I accomplish this task or bad when I don't. And feelings are important just largely, right? They can make an uncomfortable bot feel more comfortable. They can make an unprecedented new technology just slide into your life like you never knew you lived without it. So the question isn't, will adding biomimicry to my hack or product make people feel something about it and make it more usable? The question is, how do I do it effectively? And how do I get the feeling and the experience that I want my users to have? The answer has a lot to do with the factors that go into the human perception of life, as well as a lot of the physical associations with the appearance and the texture and the movement. And there's also this other issue, which is that, at the end of the day, a robot is a robot. No matter how alive it seems, no matter how attached we are, we already knew that. And recognizing the fact that, all your users will know that your robot is a robot actually is quite an important part of designing a good interface. But let's start with this, the inside. Not just of your robot, but of your users' minds, which is kind of crazy and can be much more important, in fact. Your users are human. And if you understand the way that humans perceive life and the way that humans use empathy, it's going to be much easier to get people really attached to your bot or your app or your interface. So I'm going to go over this a little bit on the quicker side. The talk where I broke the worm in half was all about this, so you can always look that up later and then be mad at me for breaking the worm. I'm sorry. But the bottom line is living things need, right? We need food, we need water, we need a big box of resistors from AliExpress, and we also need other living things. We have societies based around our need for each other, to be near each other, to fight and conquer each other, to help and love and care for each other. So we are constantly on the lookout for other living things and whether they're likely to help us or hurt us. So when we're looking for life, we're often looking for something that seems like us. And that usually means something that has evidence of need. Need starts with purpose. So I often start with that when I design these robots. Like us, a lifelike robot should be happy when it fulfills its purpose or upset when it can't. And you should be able to see that every time you interact with it. So the furworm's purpose was to not die while being crushed on stage at a conference. And if it started failing to fulfill its purpose, it would act really uncomfortable. It was very consistent in its struggle and in struggling more to show that it was in greater danger. And this alone was actually pretty convincing to people. But as you can imagine, if something were to react the same way every time, we would start classifying it as not really alive. You start to see the hand and the puppet making all the motions, and you're like, no, that's not really a thing. And this starts to be a point about emotion. Because a lot of times our emotions can feel totally random to us. So if you're building an emotional robot that humans are going to relate to, you kind of have to recreate the sense of randomness in emotions that humans actually feel. I mean, we're not only experiencing this one reaction every time something bad happens, right? Sometimes we're going to be like frustrated and, oh, it's okay. So sometimes we're going to be skeptical or like frustrated or angry or just like really sad, right? Like when something bad happens, you have a varying number of reactions that really can be based on so many factors. So recreating that is actually really important. And what's especially good is if you can recreate these random reactions that are highly convincing, consistent in their reactions, but unpredictable in the range of emotions. And that is possible particularly when your bot is really simple. So when it was uncomfortable, the firmworm would twitch really unpredictably. Although the speed and amplitude of the animation were correlated to the discomfort, it was not possible for me to predict like the actual number of twitches or the way that it twitched because that was kind of based on random noise. So while you could sense the discomfort increased while you squeezed him for longer, you really had no sense that he was going to do like the same motion over and over. And it got to be really convincing to the point that like I, as the person who wrote the code, was really uncomfortable watching it, which is a good sign that you're probably doing the emotional randomness right. And making a robot that appears to have needs and appears to have randomness in this way is really effective, especially when you couple it, with really what I'm about to talk about next. Because there's a lot that goes into the external part of biomimicry that takes these psychological elements and solidifies them. So in terms of outward appearance, I find that it's better to mimic combinations of creatures rather than a specific critter, because when you use the appearance of a known life form, you can create these expectations that are really hard to fulfill. I like the strategy of handpicking associations with existing creatures, whether they're real or fictional, and putting them together into a critter that optimally represents what you want your audience to feel about it. So you can go really simple. Like in the case of this tail pillow from Japan that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, it expresses emotions just with the movement of the tail, this very familiar animal emotion, and that can be really effective and, again, simple. You can also go big and try to mix a lot of emotions together, a lot of associations together. In this case, we get this big mess of like slightly alien cuteness, but associations are a double-edged sword, because people will draw associations from things that you didn't really mean to put in or that you didn't really think about that hard. So you can get very close to all of these cute things and then with like a single hardware choice, ruin all the work that you did to do the exterior in the first place. Associations serve to support the story of your bot. Should it make people feel good? Should it scare them? Should it scare these people but not these people? You got to handpick the right ones and then throw out the ones you don't want. This is a really careful game that you have to play. So texture becomes a really important part of this as well. And I'm not talking about just like the outside, like what you covered it with, right? Because something can look really soft outside and nice, and that doesn't necessarily mean it feels right when you squeeze it or hug it. If you can feel a big box of electronics inside, even the most charming critter is going to go from magic to robotic in the span of a single hug. If you've got something that's meant to be hugged, you should be able to hug it. And if it's meant to seem alive, it should feel alive when you hug it. And a lot of times this means not only calibrating the associations with the appearance of the bot, but also making layers of biomimicking elements so that when you touch it, squeeze it, and interact with it, it really feels real. The inside matters. The skeleton that you create can be felt. And when you make layers and actual imitation of biology, it can make your critter look and feel really right. So this is Burbles the starfish cat from my starfish cat human discomfort experiment. Some of you met Burbles here at SuperCon last year. The deal with Burbles is, you pet him and he starts to meow and he reaches for you with like his cute little kitty claws. He does that kneading motion that cats do. And then you pick him up and you put him on your body. And he looks for bare skin using the IR thermometers on his base and then suckles you with a terrifying mouth that contains a gross pneumatic motor that I bought from China. So Burbles was meant to feel like unnervingly alive, right? Like I'm trying to max people out in this simultaneous pity and discomfort. So I had to layer in a structure that would like protect his insides while also feeling pretty biological and muscular. And of course, if you're trying to imitate biological layers, it really does help to do biological layers. So this is the structure that I was using. This is a layered structure with cartilaginous bones that are made from flex PLA that go around in a circle and are contained in this like stringy wire wrap muscle, which is like spongy and feels kind of like an actual, interstitium. And then the thin layer of subcutaneous silicone that feels more like skin. And it ends in this fluffy, petable exterior that's made from feathery yarn, so it's seamless. So you end up with this very, convincing, fluffy thing that feels right when you squish it. And the effect of these layers was so profound to see because it made people react really strongly to holding burbles, whether that meant that they thought it was really cute, or they thought it was really horrifying, or they thought the first one and then the second one really fast, which is usually what happened. And so people would hug him and compare him to like their dogs and animals, but like regardless, they were kind of thinking he was a little alive. And the same thing kind of happens with the furworm. Like, okay, it's very spooky to see this without skin. It's not cute. But, what isn't cute when it's just a skeleton? The movements that I put into the worm were made much more realistic because of the skeleton underneath it. It also made it a lot stronger, so it made something that would move and break in a lifelike way. So it was predictable in a way that you would expect living things to be predictable, not in the way that you would expect robots to be predictable. And while we're on the topic there, let's talk about motion. Because motion's a huge part of life, and if we don't get the motion right, we're not really going to get, the illusion of life right here either. Because a real-looking robot with, like, halting expressions or unpredictable movement, I think you have to, it's going to put us squarely in the uncanny valley, and it's, like, generally super creepy. Robots are binary. And binary motion, where you're going from like 0 to 100 pretty fast, it's seen as starkly robotic. You have no movement, and then you have movement. You have resting to like well thought out, predetermined action pretty immediately. And animals don't do that because we don't do the predetermined action thing quite so well as a robot. We're not sure, and so we need to be safe. So we often accelerate into motion. We often kind of weave around to find the right kind of motion. We're often clumsy. There's more mistakes. We use motion as a modem for expression, which is something that robots typically don't do. We portray our emotions with and our uncertainty with the speed and acceleration of our movement. So, if you want to trick somebody into thinking something is alive, you've got to get away from this and go towards this. And this is about acceleration. Adding a really particular acceleration profile can create something that feels evocative, playful, expressive, and even, alive. And this specific robot is programmed for like a very specific expression and acceleration, right? But even on a small scale, acceleration can make a big difference in the perception of life. So in building one of my bots, I did this experiment where I had these two servos next to each other, and one was doing this like, binary motion that was just like on off, and the other one's doing this slowly accelerating thing. And one of my lab mates said that to her, one of those seemed pretty typical as robots went, but she was pretty sure that the other one was going to kill her in her sleep, and could I please keep it away from her desk? So motion really matters, both in the instant perception of life and in the creation of these robotic expressions that can feel really lifelike. Okay, so that's pretty much going to take care of like a few of the basics on how you make something appear lifelike using biomimicry and human factors. But when we're building lifelike interfaces, we have to consider that in the end, a robot is a robot. And that is a fundamentally different relationship than that between humans and living things. And that's actually kind of great and not a disadvantage at all, as long as you account for it. That's the key. Look, no matter what we do to make a robot more lifelike, it's always going to be a robot. We know it's a robot. We built it. Consumers know it's a robot. They took it out of the box and powered it on. So, the relationship between humans and cats from the get-go is going to be fundamentally different than the relationship between humans and cat robots. So when you're designing a robot that imitates a known form of life, you should always ask yourself, what is the thing that's important about the alive version of this? And how is the robot version going to be different? And this may seem like an obvious set of questions to ask, but it's actually surprising how often these questions get left behind or addressed impartially. When they're addressed well, we notice. We buy the products, we use them, we think about them all the time. The Amazon Echo, for example. It has some biomimicking elements, but the creators of the Echo obviously understood that the Echo is as different from an actual executive assistant as a bicycle is from a horse. They didn't try to make the Amazon Echo do absolutely everything that an EA would do because, why would you try to do that? It's a completely different object. The unalive version is completely different in the way we perceive, relate to, and use it. And if you didn't account for design, account for the fact that you were going to think it's a robot in the design and the documentation and the usability, right, that would result in pretty poor products and kind of confused users. But if you accept, on the other hand, that a robot is a robot, you can sometimes even avoid the uncanny valley entirely and open up these avenues for usability that become really popular and really useful to humans. So let's figure out that. To kind of illustrate this point, I'd like to close the talk with a case study on robot pets. So I often find myself building these semi-realistic robot critters in my basement like you do. So I have some thoughts about, and opinions about how much they should cost and what kind of design you should get for that price. And some of you have probably guessed that this is what I'm about to talk about. There has already been some backlash about Sony's new Aibo. This is a $1,700 robotic revival of the old toys of the early 2000s. So the new Aibo is said to learn with a cloud-based brain. So by uploading your floor plan and more to Sony's services, it can learn to navigate your house and develop a unique personality, which, by the way, will run you about $25 a month. And the American tech audience seems understandably disinterested in this, because automatic uploads of your house and more to the cloud sounds like it could be uncomfortable and maybe even dangerous, subject to surveillance or unsafe data storage or unsafe, privacy. I don't know. For most, honestly, the price tag is also just too high for what you're getting. But I'd like to kind of examine what went into the creation of the Aibo. I would guess that if I asked the designers of the modern Aibo these questions, I would get something like these answers, right? That the important parts of having a dog involve the interaction and the playing and the movements that indicate affection. And that a robot dog is distinguished from a regular dog by its greater ease of use. I would also expect a third answer that goes something like, stop asking me these questions, Christine, we're just trying to sell the cloud service and you're asking too many questions. But in any case, I don't think that these answers are necessarily incorrect. I don't think they're necessarily incorrect from a business perspective. But from a user's perspective, they are rather incomplete. And I think that, I'm glad I'm here at this conference, because I think that as weekend hackers and fast thinkers and hardware heroes, we can do a lot better. So let's redesign the modern robot pet around truer, more accurate reasons for having a pet. All right, so with pets, right? Bonding often comes as a result of care and work. The joy you feel when your dog finally learns to sit and stay is amplified because of all this work that you put into helping that dog learn that trick. And in the process of training the dog, you develop this whole bond with the animal, right? Buying the sit-stay trick from the App Store doesn't really have the same effect. And even outside of the emotional bonding, a lot of folks keep dogs not in spite of, but because they require work to maintain. Parents who get family dogs to teach children responsibility, young couples who get dogs as a practice run before having a kid. I'm in the age bracket where everybody's doing that right now. So a dog that you don't have to work for not only loses a lot of the emotional impact of a regular dog, but it also kind of defeats some of the purpose for a lot of people of getting a dog in the first place. So in light of that, I say that we strike this earlier goal. And with the understanding of the importance of work in owning pets as a part of the relationship that a human has with a pet, let's make a better one. Because look, robot pets can be so much more than just pets. Since people are going to perceive it as a robot, right? Let's stop pretending that it's only going to be a dog. Robots are awesome. Let's just lean into that. I love robots. Okay, but our robot dog, so this is what, you can imagine, our robot dog should, at a minimum, yes, provide the sense of therapeutic bonding that people get from, the mutual companionship of having a dog. And it can do that through a lot of the biomimicry that we talked about already, just through some of these factors, looking at the way that it interacts with the humans and its appearance and the way it feels. But look, a robot is also an object of work, right? If you or I were to buy a robot dog, chances are we'd do it because we're going to hack on it on the weekends. And the popularity of the original Aibo among researchers in the past wasn't really a surprise because it was like some of the coolest open hardware that you could get at that time. Modern robot pets, hypothetically, could give us some of the feedback of an organic pet, right? Like some of this feeling of bonding to it and companionship. But at the same time, be one that we can upgrade and work on and personalize, which is sort of like, you know, the non-biological equivalent of training your dog. Like you put the work into it, you upgrade it, and you know, it learns. And that to me sounds a lot better than a robot that restricts all of its potential to pretend to be like this low-tech meat dog. Because like, look, a pet that you work to upgrade, right, is both the pet of the future and the pet of the past. Like we haven't actually changed the thing that makes the dog feel really important to us. We've just accounted for the fact that it's now also a robot, which like we should account for. So, and of course, if you're skeptical that people will bond with an object by working on it, I would encourage you to consider how you feel about your weekend projects, you know, your hacks, or how people feel about their cars, or how people feel about their gardens, or how kids feel about their Legos when they've built something, or their sketchbooks, or their blocks, right? Working on objects gives us this profound sense of accomplishment, and it also gives us this very unique bond to the object itself. And so working on robot pets actually could give us this deep bond to the creature that already exhibits pretty good therapeutic biomimicry, right? So like we have the bond to it as an animal, and now we have the bond to it as an object of work, as a robot. So I haven't really yet seen the robot pet of the future, but you know, I think that we can all agree that when it comes, it's going to be like totally dope. Because we're in an era where makers are everywhere, and STEM has become this essential and highly necessary part of education. So well-designed robot pets, which are open and have the potential for this endless customization, could play a really huge role in synthesizing technology with play, with curation, with creation, and with care. I mean, look, dogs used to perform all these essential functions for humans, right? Like herding and hunting. And again, I don't necessarily want to change that. I just want to account for the fact that now it's a robot too. So robot pets, by the same measure, should perform a bunch of easy tasks that a robot could do. You know, or they should contain helpful technology like a reading light or a hotspot or a temperature sensor or a weather display. And ideally, you know, you as the user should be able to work on these functions yourself as a part of the responsibility of taking care of and upgrading your pet. Just, you know, phrases of the future. And that way, each robot pet actually becomes that unique and one-of-a-kind critter that we really look at and hope for when we get a dog, right? That like each puppy ages into this unique and one-of-a-kind dog, and each robot pet that you start with, as you build on it and hack on it and, you know, turn it into really your own thing, becomes a unique and one-of-a-kind animal as well. So I could actually just literally talk about this all day, but I won't. But if you really want to know about robot pet design, hypothetical advantages of a bespoke robot familiar, etc., or anything about the biomimicry principles that we talked about, how it applies not just to little robots, but how it applies to apps, how it applies to interfaces, how it applies to everything, come talk to me. Come see me after the talk. I'm around. I'd love to talk to you. You can also reach me here. This is my email. This is me on Twitter. That's my website. So cool. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.